Chapter 24. Yi Li shrugged her shoulders in amusement when she saw Yi Shan rushing to get off the carriage with a sullen face. Qing Shuang said with a gloomy face, "Miss, why do you care about sixth miss? She always makes fun of you. You really don't know how to appreciate kindness." Yi Li patted her hand and lifted the curtain. She smiled and said, "She's still a child. Everyone has their own means of survival. As long as she doesn't really harm me, why would I care about a child?" Peony Park was the largest peony viewing spot in the capital city and even the entire Dechu state. Every year, people from all over the country and even other countries would travel thousands of miles just to enjoy the beauty of peonies. April was the season of peonies. One could smell the faint fragrance of flowers in the air from afar. The minister's mansion had become famous in the capital city recently. One daughter was conferred the title of Jiaoyi and was pregnant with the emperor's child. Two daughters were the future Princess Li and Princess Ding. So when the carriage arrived at the gate, it attracted a lot of attention. While people were admiring the beauty of the most beautiful woman in the capital city, they were more sympathetic. They looked at the carriage in front of them. So when Yi Shan came out of the carriage, the people who pretended to be watching inadvertently were stunned. When they came back to their senses, they saw a pretty girl dressed as a maid coming out of the carriage. Then, they lifted the curtain and saw a quiet girl with a beautiful face coming out of the carriage. Was this the future Princess Ding? They didn't know whether to be surprised or disappointed. This third Miss Yi was obviously not as ugly and clumsy as they had imagined. Her calm and elegant demeanor showed that she had received a very good upbringing. This made people think of the third Miss Ye's maternal ancestors, the century-old Su family that was passed down through generations of scholars. Looking at fourth Miss Yi, who was as delicate and helpless as a fairy, it was obvious that third Miss Yi was more suitable to be the mistress of the family because she was beautiful, graceful, and dignified. Maybe it was because of jealousy of Yi Ying, many of the girls present had a trace of doubt about the taste of Prince Li, whom they admired. At the same time, they were a little more sure of themselves. Sure enough, the peony park was filled with blooming flowers and colorful butterflies, and the young girls who were reluctant to part with it added a bit of brilliance to this beauty. The young girls were walking in groups of twos and threes with their close friends. They were laughing and talking in low voices. It was a scene of prosperity and peace. When Yi Li and her group arrived at the venue in the center of Peony Park, many people had already arrived. Some of the girls were playing the zither, some were playing chess, some were painting, and some were writing poems. The maids of the princess residence shuttled back and forth, perfectly serving these noble ladies. As soon as Yi Ying approached, someone immediately greeted her. A few girls of the same age came up to greet her. Obviously, they had a good relationship with Yi Ying. The others also smiled and welcomed Yi Ying. "Ying, you're finally here. We haven't seen each other for a long time ever since you got engaged to His Highness King Li." A young girl dressed in colorful clothes happily pulled Yi Ying's arm and smiled. Yi Ying smiled, her beautiful face blushing. "Mother asked me to stay at home. I miss everyone too." After everyone was busy congratulating Yi Ying, the young girl dressed in colorful clothes asked, "This is third Miss Yi? I am Yi Li, greetings, ladies." Yi Li smiled. The young girls exchanged glances. They only felt that third Miss Yi was not as bad as the rumors said. Moreover, she was the future princess consort of Dinghua, the true legitimate daughter of the minister's residence, and the granddaughter of old Master Su. Soon, someone expressed goodwill to Yi Li. "Hello, Miss Yi. I am Imperial Censor Qin's second daughter, Qin Zheng. I am Murong Ting, the daughter of General Yang Wei." "Humph. I was wondering who it was. So it's third Miss Yi, whose engagement was broken off by brother Jingli." In the peaceful atmosphere, there were always one or two discordant voices. Everyone turned around and saw a young girl with gorgeous makeup walking over, surrounded by a crowd. Yi Li thought for a moment and understood the identity of the young girl in front of her. She was the daughter of the current emperor's cousin, Princess Xiaoren, and Princess Xiaoyang's niece, Princess Ronghua. Although Yi Li was not familiar with the noble ladies in the capital, her uncle had asked her aunt to send her information about all the noble families in the capital. Among them, there were a few that needed special attention. This Princess Ronghua happened to be one of them. Princess Ronghua is impatient. Be careful, Miss Yi. Suddenly, someone beside Yi Li whispered. Yi Li looked up and saw Imperial Censor Qin's daughter, Qin Zheng, smiling kindly at her. Yi Li nodded gratefully. Qin Zheng also smiled back. Greetings, Princess. Everyone present quickly went forward to greet Princess Ronghua. Princess Ronghua snorted and walked to Yi Li. She stared at her for a long time and then said proudly, "You are Yi Li?" Yi Li nodded, "Yes, Princess." She didn't know why, but Yi Li was keenly aware of Princess Ronghua's hostility towards her. Yi Li had never seen Princess Ronghua before, so she couldn't understand where this princess's hostility came from. I heard that you knew you were ugly and didn't dare to come out. How come you couldn't wait to run out after being abandoned by brother Jingli? Chapter 25. Yi Ying looked at Commandery Princess Ronghua with grievance. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something. Yi Li stepped forward and held her hand. She looked back at Commandery Princess Ronghua and said, "I heard that you have a good relationship with my sister. My sister offended you just now. As her elder sister, I was negligent in teaching her. Please forgive her." Commandery Princess Ronghua raised her eyebrows. "Aren't you afraid that I will punish you? Or do you want to humiliate yourself like Yi Ying?" Yi Li smiled. "Commandery Princess, you are graceful and magnanimous. You won't be angry over such a trivial matter. When I go back, Yi Li will tell my father and mother. Then I will go to the princess's mansion to ask for forgiveness. So don't make trouble now." Commandery Princess Ronghua stared at Yi Li for a long time and said thoughtfully, "You are better than Yi Ying. Brother Jingli doesn't have good taste." Obviously feeling Yi Ying's stiff wrist, Yi Li couldn't help but feel speechless. "Commandery Princess Ronghua, will you die if you don't provoke me?" "Commandery Princess, you are flattering me. Prince Li's taste and reputation have always been praised." Finally, Commandery Princess Ronghua snorted heavily and left with a large group of people. She left behind a sympathetic and worried look. It was not a good thing to offend this spoiled princess. "Fourth sister, are you okay?" Seeing Commandery Princess Ronghua go away, Yi Shan and Yi Lin hurried to ask with concern. Several other girls who had a good relationship with Yi Ying also surrounded Yi Ying. Yi Ying had offended the princess's mansion and Commandery Princess Ronghua. Don't forget that she was the future Princess Li. Prince Li was deeply favored by the Emperor and the Empress Dowager. Princess Li's status was much higher than Commandery Princess Ronghua's. Commandery Princess Ronghua has a bad temper. Don't mind her. A soft and elegant voice whispered to Yi Li. Yi Li raised her head and looked at the scholarly lady in front of her. She smiled calmly and said, "I'm fine. Thank you for your reminder, Miss Qin." Qin Zheng also smiled generously and said, "You're welcome. My mother and Madame Su are good friends. Madame Su often mentions you. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, but unfortunately, you rarely attend gatherings, so I never got the chance to meet you." Yi Li remembered that Miss Qin's father, Imperial Censor Qin, seemed to be a disciple of her maternal grandfather, Sir Qin Yun. Most importantly, Qin Zheng and her second cousin, Su Qingze, seemed to be engaged before they were born. No wonder cousin said that second cousin was going to stay in the capital for a long time. Second cousin was already 19 years old, so it was time for him to get married. Thinking of this, Yi Li's smile became more sincere. "Just call me by my name. I didn't like to go out in the past. Fortunately, I didn't miss out on a good friend like you. But, we'll get to know each other better in the future, right?" Qin Zheng clearly understood what she was referring to. She blushed and glared at her. I'm half a year older than you. You can call me sister. Let me introduce you to a few good friends. Thus, Yi Li and Yi Ying were pulled to two sides. Qin Zheng introduced Yi Li to her good friends. Unsurprisingly, these girls had taken the initiative to greet Yi Li. After discovering that Yi Li was not as bad as the rumors said, and was instead an elegant and well-spoken young lady, everyone happily accepted this new friend. Sitting together with her new friends, Yi Li began to talk about some interesting things that happened in the boudoir in the capital. She realized that these girls were not as boring as she originally thought. Indeed, the young ladies carefully nurtured by the aristocratic families would most likely become the matriarchs of these aristocratic families in the future. Naturally, they were all intelligent women with both talent and ability, and not those love-struck women who lived or died for love as written in the storybooks. Miss Yi, it's better if you stay away from your younger sister. Murong Ting had obviously inherited her father's forthright personality. She glanced at Yi Ying, who was practicing with someone not far away, and said, "Don't worry." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, "What do you mean?" Murong Ting waved her hand and said, "Yi Ying's reputation is not very good right now. I heard that Zhaoyang royal princess did not want to send an invitation to her at all. Who knows how she persuaded the virtuous Zhaoyang royal princess to personally speak on her behalf. Zhaoyang royal princess is an upright person and hates those who do not follow the rules. If you get too close to her, Zhaoyang royal princess might take her anger out on you." Yi Li knew that Yi Ying's reputation was not very good now, but she was still a little surprised that it was bad to this extent. She thought that the requirements for women in this era were not as strict as in the ancient times of her previous life. If it was a normal betrothal, it would be fine. Even if someone was jealous, it would not be good to say anything. Another young lady from Duke Hua's mansion frowned and said, "She's already intimate with her future brother-in-law before she's even married. How can a sister like that stand?" Previously, Princess Ronghua and Yi Ying had the best relationship, but after the betrothal, Princess Ronghua and Yi Ying fell out. Murong Ting said disdainfully, "I heard that Prince Li and Yi Ying met mostly because of Princess Ronghua." Princess Ronghua probably felt that she was being used by Yi Ying. Qin Zheng frowned and said, "All right, why are you saying this in front of Li, her?" The two then remembered that Yi Li was the most direct victim of this matter. Last year's first place was your fourth sister, the future princess consort Li. She was first in zither and dance, and fifth in poetry. Yi Li glanced at Yi Ying, who was sitting across a table and talking to someone. She smiled and said, "I know this. But I didn't know that Zheng and Miss Hua are both rare talented ladies." Hua Tianxiang waved her hand. Madame Yi was the most talented lady in the capital. "This year, Zheng and I won't be participating. We'll be depending on you." Yi Li was helpless. "I'm really not good at these things." Qin Zheng held her hand and smiled. "This year, Yi Ying will definitely participate. Li can't lose to her." Hua Tianxiang was also in high spirits. "That's right. Yi Li must avenge me. Last year, I worked so hard, but I lost to Yi Ying. So embarrassing." Murong Ting didn't forget to join in the fun. She looked at her eagerly. "In martial arts, I can take first place every year. Unfortunately, no one can compete with me. Li, you have to work hard." Yi Li didn't know whether to laugh or cry at these new people she met. She really wasn't good at these things. Although she had been taught by her mother since childhood, she knew some things. However, compared to those who had put in a lot of effort into training, he was nowhere near as good as them. Take Yi Ying's dance for example. Although she didn't see it, it was said that there were 5 or 6 dance masters who were specially hired for Yi Ying. Every dance was specially choreographed, and Yi Ying had indeed put in a lot of effort in this aspect. As for her, ever since her mother passed away and she regained the memories of her previous life, her interest in these things had decreased by more than 10%. Moreover, Madame Wang wouldn't specially hire good masters to teach her. This year, I'm afraid you have to participate even if you don't want to. Murong Ting ate the exquisite snacks on the table as she said, the winner of the 100-Flower Festival has the right to choose anyone present to spar with. Believe me, if it weren't for the fact that you didn't go out all these years, I'm afraid the person who gets the most challenges every year would be you. In the past, she was Prince Li's fiancée. Now, she was the future Princess Ding. In the eyes of many people, Yi Li's life was so good that it made people jealous. They were probably waiting for her to make a fool of herself. It was ranked third among the 5 most famous zither in the world. It was a treasure that every zither lover dreamed of. Yi Li felt even more regretful. I haven't touched a piano in years. The 4 of them looked at each other and shrugged helplessly, admiring the prizes and people on the stage. Qin Zheng continued to introduce the people present to Yi Li in a low voice, those on the stage, that old mister is the head of the Imperial College, old Darren Suzhou. He is also the teacher of the current emperor. If it weren't for the eldest princess, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to invite him. The other top scorers are the current assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Mo Jian. The heir of Marquis Muyang, Mu Yang. The eldest son of the northern general's estate, Ling Qingyu. Yi Li's gaze swept over the people Qin Zheng mentioned and memorized them one by one. Who is that woman? Although she never felt that Yi Ying's beauty was truly breathtaking, Yi Li had always admitted that Yi Ying was beautiful enough. But when she came out today, she found that Yi Ying's title as the most beautiful woman in the capital seemed to be shaky. Not to mention Princess Xixia from the Nanzhao Kingdom, Hua Tianxiang's appearance was enough to be compared with Yi Ying's. Qin Zheng was beautiful, but her graceful and elegant temperament from a scholarly family was not comparable to Yi Ying's lovely and moving temperament. There were also several women at the banquet who were extremely outstanding. If it was only these slight differences, how could Yi Ying have firmly held the title of the most beautiful woman in the capital for the past few years? Looking at the woman sitting on the stage, her beautiful face had a bit of charm. Even sitting between 2 men, she was still calm and composed. It was a charm that completely disagreed with the ladies of noble families. Qin Zheng's expression was a bit strange, and she paused for a moment before saying, "That is Miss Yaoji from Qingqing district. She's known for being a master of both the zither and dance. Compared to her, Yi Ying's dance is not worth watching at all. Also, she has a good relationship with Marquis Muyang's heir and young master Feng San." Qin Zheng said a bit awkwardly, but Yi Li understood the woman's identity. Seeing her sitting between Marquis Muyang's heir and young master Feng San with bright eyes and a natural smile, she only felt that this girl was a strange woman. While the 4 of them were talking and laughing, the eldest princess announced the official start of the 100-Flower Festival. Yi Li was originally a bit curious about how to compete in the zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, poetry, singing, and dancing events at the same time. But it was clear that everyone was very clear about the process of the competition. The tables with brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones were placed at the edge of the venue, and the ladies who were interested in participating in calligraphy, painting, and poetry came forward. The maids brought up all kinds of musical instruments and stood at the 2 sides of the front of the venue, leaving the empty space in the center for the woman who would be praising the dance. Yi Li couldn't help but want to praise the organizer of the banquet. It was indeed a very humane setting. There were no hard and fast rules about which events each person had to perform. After all, not everyone was proficient in the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. It also avoided the possibility of many people making a fool of themselves. Beside Zhaoyang eldest princess, Princess Xixia and Princess Ronghua stood up at the same time, but Princess Ronghua walked to the place with the brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones, while Princess Xixia walked to the center of the venue. Obviously, she planned to perform a dance. Yi Ying walked to the place with the zither on the side. Her jade-like fingers lightly plucked, and a pleasant melody flowed out from her fingers. It seems that Princess Xixia is really going to compete with Yi Ying. Murong Ting smiled. Who in the capital didn't know that Yi Ying was the best at dancing? This Princess Xixia chose to dance as soon as the competition started, clearly wanting to show off her strength to Yi Ying. Hua Tianxiang admired Princess Xixia's graceful dance, and praised, "The people of Nanzhao are good at singing and dancing, not to mention the number one beauty, Princess Xixia." It seems that today, Princess Xixia is going to outshine all the other beauties. Princess Xixia's dance was passionate and elegant. It didn't lack the unrestrained enthusiasm of a foreign nation, but it didn't lose the grace of the Dechu state. In comparison, Yi Ying, who hadn't danced yet, seemed a bit inferior in terms of clothing. Murong Ting also agreed, nodding and smiling, "I think that in terms of dancing, only Yaoji can beat Princess Xixia. In this dance, Yi Ying is going to lose this year." Yi Ying isn't an ordinary person either. Seeing Princess Xixia's strength, she can still be so calm. Qin Zheng reminded. Hua Tianxiang smiled, "If she doesn't have this bit of skill, Yi Ying won't have the face to come out. She's destined to lose the dance, so her zither skills naturally have to be steady no matter what." Yi Li frowned, "I'm afraid that Princess Xixia came prepared." Although she was no longer a sniper in this life, it didn't affect her eyesight. Yi Li didn't miss the sneer that flashed through Princess Xixia's eyes when she swept over Yi Ying. Murong Ting was speechless. "Don't tell me that this Princess Xixia's zither skills are better than Yi Ying's." Chapter 28. Hua Tianxiang shook her head and said, "If that's the case, Princess Xixia should play the guqin first before dancing. Dancing consumes a lot of energy. Playing the guqin after dancing will affect your performance. Listen to Yi Ying's guqin." The originally melodious and mellow sound of the zither suddenly changed direction, and the music became urgent and passionate. Princess Xixia's graceful figure moved even faster. In the center of the field, her clothes flew like a gust of wind, and hundreds of flowers bloomed. Clearly, Yi Ying had probably noticed this as well, or perhaps she had sensed that Princess Xixia's strength made her feel threatened. Everyone in the stands obviously noticed the change. Zhaoyang royal princess frowned, and her gaze on Yi Ying was somewhat cold. Yaoji, who was sitting elegantly and admiring Princess Xixia's dance, suddenly giggled. She turned her head and smiled at Mo Jingli, who had a serious expression. "Your Highness Li Wang, the future Li Wangfei is indeed extraordinary. Yaoji admires you." Mo Jingli's face was cold. He didn't even look at Yaoji. He just frowned. In his eyes, Yaoji, who came from a dance troupe, was not worthy of speaking to him. Naturally, he didn't pay attention to Yaoji's words. Yaoji didn't care about his disregard. Her beautiful eyes moved and she smiled sweetly. The number one beauty of the capital lives up to her reputation. But she lacks hospitality. Yaoji's voice wasn't loud, but Yi Ying was sitting at the place closest to the stands. Yaoji's words passed into Yi Ying's ears. Su Zhe, the Imperial College's principal, who hadn't said anything, also snorted. If Yi Ying didn't need to care about Yaoji's words, Su Zhe's attitude made Yi Ying's heart tremble. Her smooth fingering paused. Although she quickly reacted, Feng Zhiyao, who was sitting next to Yaoji, gradually frowned. He smiled faintly and said, "I originally thought that after a year, Li Wangfei's guqin skills would have improved. I didn't expect." Yi Li naturally couldn't hear what the people in front were saying. Although Yi Li was proficient in lip reading, she didn't plan on sharing it with others. Therefore, what Qin Zheng and the others saw was that Yi Ying's expression was even uglier than Princess Xixia's, who had just been schemed against during the dance. Princess Xixia ended the scene with a perfect posture. She glared fiercely at Yi Ying, then turned around and returned to the side of Zhaoyang, eldest princess. The fragrant sweat on her forehead also showed that she was not as relaxed as she appeared. After all, Yi Ying's song was too different from the sudden turn before and after. She was unprepared and did not make a fool of herself on the spot because of her superb dancing skills and adaptability. Since she dared to scheme against her, she would definitely teach her a lesson. After nearly 4 hours of competition, the winners of each skill were finally decided. Yi Ying's results were slightly worse than last year's. Although she did her best to display a flying immortal dance, she barely tied with Princess Xixia for first place. However, young Master Feng San, who was known as the zither master in the capital, vetoed it. He lost to Lu Ruyun, the daughter of the Lu family, and was placed second. After that, she got third place in the poem competition, but it was difficult to hide Yi Ying's aggrieved and defeated expression. On the other hand, Princess Xixia, as an outsider, shone brightly in the later competitions. She got third place in zither, first in calligraphy, and second in chess. As a result, Princess Xixia became the champion of this 100-flower festival with 2 first places, 1 second place, and 1 third place. Zhaoyang eldest princess was clearly very satisfied with this result. The judges in the stands also praised this foreign princess a bit more. Just as old Master Su Zhe was about to announce the results of the 100-flower festival, Princess Xixia bent down and whispered a few words in Zhaoyang princess's ear. Then she stood up and bowed apologetically to old Master Su. She turned around and looked at the gloomy Yi Ying below the stage. A cold smile flashed across her face. "Everyone, please forgive me. Xixia requests to redo the dance competition with 4th young Miss Yi." Princess Xixia said in a clear voice. The venue suddenly became noisy. Feng Zhiyao lazily leaned in his chair and looked at Princess Xixia with a smile. To be able to see the dance of the princess and the capital's #1 beauty again, I believe everyone here will be very happy. But, why do you want to redo it? Princess Xixia raised her head and proudly said, "Doesn't your central plane say that there is no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts? Although this dance is not the same as martial arts, this princess is not used to being on the same level as others." As she spoke, she disdainfully glanced at Yi Ying. She was just short of saying that Yi Ying did not deserve to be on the same level as her. Below the stage, Yi Ying's face immediately turned pale. Her slender figure was on the verge of collapsing. In the eyes of everyone present, Princess Xixia was unavoidably going too far in bullying others. Princess Xixia did not care about other people's gazes. She only stared at Yi Ying. Feng Zhiyao lazily swept his phoenix eyes over Mo Jingli, who was sitting on the side with a gloomy expression. He smiled and said, "Your Highness Princely, what do you think? After all, 4th young Miss Yi is your fiancé." Mo Jingli glanced at Yi Ying below the stage. There was a slight fluctuation in his cold eyes. He faintly said, "Is Princess Xixia dissatisfied with Yaoji's judging?" Yaoji smiled sweetly. Suddenly, she was very charming. If Princess Xixia has an even more beautiful dance, Yaoji is naturally willing to appreciate it. But I don't know if I have the honor. I believe that many of the young ladies here don't know how to dance. Yi Li answered confidently. Not knowing how to dance was not something to be ashamed of. In reality, there were very few young ladies of Dechu State who would learn how to dance, unless they really liked it or their family had the intention of sending their daughter into the palace. Since Yi Li had already expressed that she had never learned how to dance, forcing her to dance would be unreasonable. Princess Xixia also understood that she had been played by Yi Ying and could only temporarily suppress the anger in her heart. She stared at the calm and elegant blue-clothed young lady below the stage. Her eyes flashed slightly. "Just now, I didn't see Miss Yi go on stage. Since 4th Miss Yi has so much confidence in Jie, then please show Miss Ye's talents in other areas." Or. She looked at Yi Li with a ghost of a smile. She paused for a moment before raising her voice to say, "Or Miss Yi doesn't know anything." Yi Li lowered her head and was silent for a moment. She raised her head and looked indifferently at Princess Xixia. If so, then Yi Li will embarrass herself. Yi Li. Qin Zheng said worriedly. Murong Ting and Hua Tianxiang also looked worriedly at Yi Li. Yi Li blinked at her and shook her head with a slight smile. Qin Zheng saw that her smile was not forced and her heart relaxed a bit. Thinking about it, Li Er's mother was the most talented woman in the capital and her maternal grandfather was the most outstanding person in the world. Even if she didn't show it normally, she should have learned everything she needed to learn. Under everyone's gaze, Yili walked to the table where the brush and ink were still placed. After thinking for a moment, she picked up the brush and began to move on the fine rice paper. On the stage, Feng Zhiyao looked with interest at the blue-clothed young lady who was painting with her head down and nodded inadvertently. Sitting next to him, Yaoji glanced at him and laughed in a low voice. Feng San thinks highly of Yi San Xiaojie. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and said with a smile, "Isn't she very interesting? At least she's not as mediocre as the rumors say." This calm attitude was enough to make Feng Zhiyao think highly of her. Not to mention that Mo Jingli had suffered a loss at her hands not long ago. Maybe Yao would really marry a good princess this time. Marquis Muyang's heir also seemed to be interested in the topic of the two. Feng San knows Yi San Xiaojie. Feng Zhiyao shook his head. You just returned to the capital and you don't know? The future Princess Ding. Mo Xiuyao. Muyang frowned. He had some friendship with Mo Xiuyao when he was young, but since Mo Xiuyao's accident, they had not seen each other again. Feng Zhiyao nodded. That's right. What do you think? Muyang raised his eyebrows. Mo Jingli's eyes are blind. Yaoji couldn't help but chuckle. She covered her mouth and laughed. Yiying walked to old Madame Ye's side and said in a sweet voice when the family of three was finally done with each other. Yi Shangshu smiled and said, "It's rare for to be so broad-minded. Mother, you see. In a few days, you'll have to enter the palace to pay your respects. At that time, I'll report this good news to Zhao Nyang." Old Madame Yi nodded and looked sideways at Yi Li. She smiled and said, "Your second sister has always been very good to your sisters. In the future, each of you will be in charge of a manor. You should go and accompany her more." "Grandmother." Yiying covered her face shyly and called out in a low voice. Her pale face blushed. In contrast, Yi Li was less shy as a girl. Yi Shangshu looked at his youngest daughter lovingly and laughed with her. Yiying looked at Yi Li with her beautiful eyes and said softly, "Third sister hasn't seen second sister for a long time, right? Mother should prepare a good gift for second sister for third sister." Wang Shi was stunned and looked at Yiying with a frown. However, old Madame Yi was moved and looked at Yi Li again. She hesitated but didn't say anything. Yi Li saw old Madame Yi and Yiying's expressions and understood what Yiying meant. She looked at Yiying calmly and looked forward to her performance. Yiying saw that Wang Shi didn't understand her words and old Madame Yi didn't change her expression. She couldn't help but frown and reminded softly, "Sister Zhao is pregnant now. I heard that when a woman is pregnant, her appearance, the people present were not really stupid." Wang Shi immediately reacted when she heard the word appearance. She looked at Yi Li with more enthusiasm. "Master," Yi Li sighed helplessly in her heart. No one in this family was a fool. Is right. Li, send the youth-retaining pearl to the palace as a gift for Zhao. You can ask your mother for whatever you want. Yi Shangshu obviously didn't think there was anything wrong with Yi Ying's proposal and immediately made the decision. Youth-retaining pearl. Yi Li was bored and thought of the most coveted emerald pearl among the 3 prizes she received. It was said that people who wore the youth-retaining pearl could stay young forever. For women who loved beauty, it was more attractive than precious jewelry and bright clothes. However, for Yi Li, who was mentally old and physically 15 years old, it wasn't that attractive. Everyone loved beauty. She was still very young now. She only needed to take care of herself a little in the future and pursue beauty when her appearance was basically consistent with her actual age. If she was 50 years old and still had a face of 20 years old, Yi Li wasn't sure if she would like it that much. What's more, she was still skeptical about the youth-retaining pearl's so-called eternal youth. Chapter 32. Old Madam Yi was already a shrewd person. How could she not know how rude it was to ask for a gift back after giving it out? But the beauty retaining pearl was very useful to Zhao Nyang. She believed that in 2 days, when the news of the 100-Flower Festival reached the palace, Zhao Nyang would ask them for it. Moreover, she didn't plan to ask for it back in the name of the Yi family. In the end, Yi Li would personally ask for it back. Of course, old Madam Yi suspected that this was just Yi Li's excuse. Yi Li didn't want to take it out at all. Squeezing out a kind smile, old Madam Yi said softly, "Good child, grandmother knows this is a bit rude. But you also know how important this beauty retaining pearl is to Zhao Nyang. Zhao Nyang has a hard time in the palace. If she has the beauty retaining pearl and can get the emperor's favor." Yi Li frowned and said helplessly, "But grandmother, I've already sent the beauty retaining pearl and snow zither to eldest uncle." Minister Ye's face darkened. He angrily stared at Yi Li and said, "Nonsense. What does your eldest uncle need the beauty retaining pearl for?" If it was someone else, Minister Yi might have sent people to stop them. But Minister Yi didn't have the guts to stop them from giving something to his deceased wife's eldest uncle. Master Qingyun had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The second son, Su Hongyan, was the only one in the Su family who was still in the government. In fact, the one who made Minister Yi feel the most pressure was his eldest uncle, Su Hongyu, who had left the capital 10 years ago. At the same time, he was the most famous scholar in the world. Unlike imperial censor Su, who was refined yet sharp and principled, this great scholar, who was praised by the world and said to have surpassed his master, always had a cultured and elegant demeanor. However, if he didn't like someone, that person would definitely suffer a fate worse than death. This was also the reason why Minister Yi didn't dare to send Yi Rong to Lishan Academy even though they were in-laws. This brother-in-law of his was not as upright as he looked on the outside. Back then, he had deeply experienced this. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "A few days ago, eldest uncle wrote a letter saying that grandfather's pine organ was broken a few days ago." So when Li heard the sound of the snow, she was happy and immediately sent someone to deliver it to grandfather. At the same time, I also remembered that the beauty retaining pearl was of no use to Li, so I decided to send the beauty retaining pearl to eldest aunt. Of course, she also sent the purple jade hairpin, which was said to have health benefits, to second aunt. Minister Ye's face was distorted again. He didn't know why, but when he heard that the pine organ that his daughter gave to his father-in-law was broken, he suddenly felt an inexplicable chill on his back. He was also angry and guilty in his heart. Therefore, she couldn't put on a tough attitude towards Yi Li. She just scolded reluctantly, "You, child, why didn't you discuss it with your parents?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows carelessly. Was it because her father had been an official for too long that his brain was not working well, or did he really think that Madame Wang was virtuous? To give a gift to the former father-in-law, he still had to discuss it with the concubine's second wife. After discussing it, could she still give it out? It's Li who didn't consider it. It's eldest uncle who said that grandfather was angry. Li can't be filial in front of grandfather. Today, when I got the snow sound of the zither, I was happy and immediately sent it away. Yi Li lowered her head guiltily. Minister Yi smiled reluctantly and said, "Father knows that Li is filial." "Father!" Yi Ying anxiously called. Minister Ye's expression was solemn. He waved his hand and said, "This matter is over. No need to say any more. Later, send more banknotes to you into the palace. Bribing the people in the palace can't be saved." Although Madame Wang was unwilling, but she had followed Minister Yi for 20 years. She understood her husband better than anyone. Looking at his face, she knew that this matter was not negotiable. She couldn't help but resent Yi Li and the late Madame Yi in her heart. It was like this every time. As long as the Su family was mentioned, her husband would never think of her. Could it be that the Su family was his in-laws' family and her Wang family was not? Coming out of Rong Le Hall, Yili was annoyed and gently sighed. She looked at Yi Ying, who followed behind her, and said, "Fourth sister, I'll go back first." Yi Ying acted as if she didn't hear Yili's words. She softly said with a smile, "Third sister is really generous. That kind of priceless treasure is given away without even looking at it. Fourth sister is joking. Grandfather and 2 aunts are not outsiders. What's more, the 2 aunts take good care of sister. Although sister was born in the minister's residence, everything around her is not hers. Now that I finally have a few things that I can take out, I naturally have to show filial piety to the elders. After all, people should have a grateful heart, right? And you, all these years, eating and using my mother's dowry money, have you ever thought about her? Third sister is right. I've learned my lesson." Yi Ying gritted her teeth and said in a low voice. Yili smiled, "I'm a common person. I only know how to use these things to repay the care of the elders. I can't compare to fourth sister's elegance and refinement. You don't care about these things. Fourth sister, take care. Third sister, take care." Ignoring how Yi Ying's expression changed behind her, Yili leisurely walked in the direction of Qing Yixian. "Qing Shuang, have someone tell concubine Zhao that it's almost time. Find something for madam to do. I don't want to see them in the near future." Thinking like this, Yili felt that her grandfather, who had forced her to memorize so many ancient books, was really too wise. At least, he allowed her to pull out 2 poems from her mind to make up the numbers when she couldn't refuse. Chapter 33. Sister Qin, Tianxiang, Murong. When Yili arrived at the appointed tea house, Qin Zheng and the other 2 had already arrived and were drinking tea and chatting happily. Qin Zheng looked back at her and smiled. Murong Ting pulled her to sit down. "You're finally here. How was it? Did your damn sister make things difficult for you?" Yili raised her eyebrows. "Sorry I'm late, but why do you think she would make things difficult for me? Not only Madame Wang, but even Yi Ying had been away for the past few days. How could they have the time to make things difficult for her when they couldn't even see her? It's better to be careful. I heard that Her Highness Zhaoi in the palace has been in a bad mood these days." Hua Tianxiang held the teacup with a reserved and elegant smile. Yili blinked her eyes, understanding in her heart. She thanked Hua Tianxiang silently. Hua Tianxiang raised her eyebrows and raised her teacup to her. Murong Ting looked at her good friends around her and couldn't help but laugh. Alas, it's not easy to have one more friend. Unfortunately, Li will be getting married soon. We'll still be friends after we get married, Yili said. Don't tell me you won't recognize me as a friend after we get married? Murong Ting leaned on the table without the temperament of a noble lady and said dejectedly, "Of course not. But when you become Princess Ding, how will you have so much freedom?" Hua Tianxiang pursed her lips and snickered. "It'll be the same when you get married." "I don't want to." Murong Ting shouted, her almond-shaped eyes widening. "I won't marry that idiot." Yili looked up in surprise at the angry Murong Ting and then turned her gaze to Qin Zheng. Qin Zheng snickered and whispered in Yili's ear. Only then did Yili know that Murong Ting was engaged to Leng Haoyu, the 3rd young master of the northern general's estate, as soon as she was born. But compared to his eldest brother, Leng Qingyu, who was proficient in both literature and martial arts, Leng Haoyu was a hedonistic son who was good at eating, drinking, and playing. How could Murong Ting, who came from a family of generals and was the only daughter of General Yang Wei, like Leng Haoyu? The 2 of them had been at odds ever since they were young. Basically, they would fight whenever they met. However, Murong Ting had learned martial arts from the Yang Wei general, and Leng Haoyu couldn't beat Murong Ting. Every time she was beaten to a pulp, Murong Ting despised her even more. My father is a stubborn person. He says that once a man makes a promise, he must keep it. He won't break off the engagement even if he dies. That idiot. Since he dared to marry me, I'll beat him up until his father can't recognize him. Murong-ting raised her little chin and said angrily. Hua Tianxiang lazily rested her chin on her hand and said with a smile, I think Ling Shaosen treats you well. Have you ever seen a man so obedient in the entire capital? If you tell him to go forward, he will never go backward. If you tell him to go left, he will never go right. Murong-ting snorted and did not answer. Yili watched her reaction with interest. It was inevitable for girls to like outstanding and strong men. Murong-ting naturally looked down on third young Master Leng, who couldn't even beat a woman. However, it seemed that Murong-ting didn't hate her fiancé as much as she thought. Moreover, was a man who had been beaten since he was young and had lost every time. Was he really that weak? If that was the case, then Leng Haoyu was actually a masochist, right? Yi Li's imagination ran wild in her mind. However, she didn't say anything to persuade Murong-ting. She didn't like to interfere with her friend's choice. Moreover, she really didn't know Leng Haoyu. Murong-ting recovered quickly from her anger. She quickly put the annoying fiancé behind her, clapped her hands and stood up, let's go shopping. We're not here to drink tea. The three girls and the fake girl happily shuttled through the famous shops in the capital, picking out all kinds of jewelry and clothes they liked. Soon, everyone had a rich harvest. Yili looked at the people behind her, who were full of bags, and followed the three of them around in amusement. She had to admit that no matter what era it was, women's desire to shop was very strong. Yili wasn't idle either. While shopping with the three of them, she also glanced at the progress of the shops that were being renovated recently. Although she didn't go in, the results were satisfactory from the outside. She believed that they could reopen a month before the wedding. At that time, she might be able to ask her eldest cousin to raise a plaque for the treasure pavilion. Yili planned silently in her heart. After sending the servants who helped to carry the things back, the girls, who were tired from shopping, planned to find a place to have lunch. Murong-ting, who was most familiar with the delicacies in the capital, recommended the most famous Chu Xiang Pavilion in the capital. Chu Xiang Pavilion was indeed the most famous restaurant in the capital. As soon as they stepped into the lobby, they saw the luxurious and graceful decorations of the restaurant that didn't lose to those of famous families. They knew that the background of the owner of this restaurant was definitely not low. Although they didn't come late, the business of Chu Xiang Pavilion was better than expected. A well-dressed child respectfully apologized to the four of them, indicating that there were no more empty private rooms. Murong-ting often walked outside, so she didn't care about whether there were private rooms or not. She directly let the waiter lead the four of them to the second floor and found a relatively good empty seat to sit down. Yili glanced around the lobby. There was no lack of noble girls eating in twos and threes, so the four of them sitting outside didn't seem particularly eye-catching. After ordering the dishes, Murong-ting smiled with satisfaction. Chu Xiang Pavilion's squirrel mandarin fish is the best in the capital. I came twice and didn't eat it. I didn't expect that I would have it when I called you all together today. Today is really good luck. Yili curiously asked, Murong often comes out to shop. Murong-ting smiled and said, my father doesn't like to control me, and I can't stay alone, so I often come out to walk around. Moreover, my father loves to eat good food. I don't have any talent for this, so I just look around to see if there's anything good to buy for him to eat. Speaking of this, Murong-ting was a bit embarrassed. However, anyone could see that the father-daughter relationship of the Yang Wei general's estate was definitely different from that of the Shangshu estate. At least, it was definitely different from the relationship between Shangshu Yi and Yili. Hua Tianxiang smiled and said, that's why, when I go shopping, I usually drag Murong out with me. There's no place in the capital that she doesn't know. While the four of them were happily talking, the door of the private room on the other side opened with a bang. A beautiful red figure rushed out from inside. The four of them simultaneously pretended to see the person clearly. Murong-ting said in surprise, huh? Isn't that, be careful. Before her voice fell, Murong Ting had already stood up and quickly jumped out. Chu Xiang Pavilion, second floor. A beautiful figure quickly rushed out of the private room and was about to collide with the waiter who was slowly carrying a tray of dishes. Murong Ting jumped out at the same time, wanting to grab the woman. However, she was still half a beat too slow and let the red sleeve slip past her fingertips. Be careful. Yili calculated the direction that the hot pot of soup on the tray would be hit at almost the same time that the red-clothed woman bumped into the waiter. She casually grabbed the empty bowl on the table and threw it over. After hesitating for a while, the precise location and strength of the throw forced the soup pot that had just left the tray and was flying towards someone's head to the left. With a series of clanking sounds, the soup pot fell to the ground in an open space not far away. Because the waiter protected the tray with all his might, the remaining few plates fell to the ground in front of him and the soup splashed on a guest's clothes. There wasn't any serious damage. Chapter 34. The entire second floor was silent. The waiter's face was pale as he looked at the pot of soup on the ground and gratefully looked at the green-clothed young girl sitting next to him. If it wasn't for the girl throwing the bowl, the waiter knew very well that the pot of boiling soup that had just been put into the fire would very likely fall on the head of the young master who was sitting with his back to him by the stairs. It might even fly down to the first floor and hit the guests below. The red-clothed girl clearly didn't realize what kind of accident she could have caused. After being pulled back by Murong Ting, she angrily threw off her hand and angrily scolded, "You impudent! You dare to block this princess' anger." Qin Zheng and the others finally saw that the red-clothed girl was the Nanzhao country's Princess Xixia that they had seen at the 100-Flower Festival a few days ago. Murong Ting didn't fall for this and coldly said, "If you want to put on the airs of a princess, go back to Nanzhao. There are so many people coming and going in the restaurant, yet you still charge around. What if you hurt someone?" Princess Xixia's face was ugly. It was clear that her mood was not very good. She disdainfully snorted and said, "It's just a few lowly commoners. So what if this princess is hurt?" When these words came out, the expressions of all the guests on the second floor changed. It had to be known that Chu Xiang Pavilion was one of the best restaurants in the capital. The price was not something normal people could afford. The people who came in and out were all rich and noble. Princess Xixia's arrogant words had undoubtedly offended everyone present. Hua Tianxiang stood up and her beautiful face was dyed with a trace of coldness. Her smile was still reserved and noble. "Even lowly commoners are my Chu state's lowly commoners. It doesn't seem like a princess of a small Nanzhao country has the right to belittle them." Nanzhao country was small and weak. If it wasn't for the three powerful countries that kept fighting each other for several hundred years, the small Nanzhao would have been swallowed up long ago. "You have big guts." Princess Xixia's face was gloomy as she angrily stared at Hua Tianxiang. Hua Tianxiang slightly raised her chin and stared back at her without showing any weakness. She was just a princess of a small country. She respected her a bit because of Zhao Yang, eldest princess. Did she really think that the nobles of Chu state were afraid of her? "Princess Xixia, you should know what kind of place Chu Xiang Pavilion is. If someone is hurt, I'm afraid Princess Royal will be in a difficult position," Qin Zheng said with a faint smile. Her eyes looking at Princess Xixia did not have the usual gentle aura. Princess Xixia's expression changed slightly. She snorted and glanced at the back of the man whose hair was almost washed by the boiling hot soup. "Isn't he fine? Mind your own business." Hua Tianxiang withdrew her gaze from Princess Xixia and smiled at Murong Ting. "Murong, forget it. She was a foreign princess after all. She didn't even know how to apologize. We'll just walk around them whenever we see them. Who knows who will be the next unlucky one?" Murong Ting looked Princess Xixia up and down in a serious manner. Then, she nodded and said, "Tianxiang, you are right. Also, everyone can just admit that they were unlucky today. Who told our great Princess Xixia to be in a bad mood? Waiter, are you scared silly? Aren't you going to clean up? The waiter, who was frightened by the sudden situation, quickly apologized to the customers who were affected and hurriedly went to clean up the mess. Slut! Princess Xixia was so angry that her face turned green. She pulled down the long whip at her waist and lashed it at Hua Tianxiang's face. Tianxiang! Qin Zheng exclaimed. A green shadow flashed and wrapped around the oncoming whip. Yili pulled Hua Tianxiang away with one hand and grabbed the whip in front of her with the other. The slight pain in her palm made Yili frown. Because of the seat, she could only pull Hua Tianxiang away for a moment. Then, she had to take Princess Xixia's whip. However, her palm didn't hurt as much as she expected. Yili looked over and realized that the whip in Princess Xixia's hand had already slipped out of her grasp. Her face was pale as she stared at Yili while holding the back of her hand. Yili raised her eyebrows and glanced at the surrounding diners. Finally, her gaze landed on the man leaning against the stairs who didn't turn around. Princess Xixia, those who come are guests. My Dechu State's subjects respect you. I'm afraid that your habit of waving the whip around is not suitable for the Dechu State. Please conduct yourself with dignity. Waving her hand, Yili's cold gaze landed on Princess Xixia. Slowly putting the long whip back into her hand, Yili didn't plan on returning it to her. The girls of this era, even the cheerful and lively Mu Rongting, knew their limits. How could this Princess Xixia play with such a dangerous toy? This, I will have someone send it to the Princess Royal's residence. Yili, you think you can be proud just because you won the title of 100-Flower Queen? Didn't you get abandoned by Prince Li? Didn't you have to marry that trash of a Prince Ding? Humph, even this princess feels sorry for you. Yili's eyes were cold. I think that with Princess Xixia's knowledge and intelligence, she probably can't understand the significance and status of the Ding King's residence in the Dechu State. Naturally, she also can't understand the current emperor's kindness. Or perhaps Princess Xixia's forgetful brain has already forgotten that the trash you speak of swept through Nanjiang at the age of 15. Nanzhao was one of them, right? Your Highness the Princess of Nanzhao, who can't even compare to trash, do you still have the face to live? Can you still spout such nonsense here? As for the princess's pity, I probably can't bear it. It's better to keep it for myself. Yili's tone wasn't angry, nor was it hurried. However, it was this kind of slow and leisurely tone that made Princess Xixia's face turn from gloating to green, then purple, then black. Many of the diners present also began to quietly laugh. Hua Tianxiang, who had been frightened by her face being almost disfigured, came back to her senses. She walked to Yili's side and smiled. Li, you've been exposed. How could a small country like Nanzhao know so much? I only hope that with the Princess Royal's guidance, some people will know what a true princess style is. After all, the Princess Royal is the model of a woman in our dynasty. Murong Ting walked over angrily. She had almost lost her courage from not being able to save Hua Tianxiang in time. Now that she reacted, she didn't have a good expression towards Princess Xixia. Tianxiang is right. Princess Xixia is only envious of Li. Although Li can't be Princess Ding, she can be Princess Ding. She didn't want a certain princess to travel thousands of miles, hee. After being secretly pinched by Qin Zheng, Murong Ting reluctantly stopped her words and replaced them with two laughs. However, the meaning of that unfinished sentence was already clear enough. What's going on? Xixia, what are you doing? The door to the private room was opened again. Mo Jingli looked at this scene with a cold face and sword-like brows furrowed. When his gaze fell on Yili, his face became even more gloomy. Brother Jingli, they're bullying Xia, Seeing Mo Jingli come out, Princess Xixia hurriedly leaned over, a trace of a girl's delicate appearance on her face. Oh, everyone present pretended to be eating seriously, but their ears were pricked up. His Highness Prince Li was going to get married at the beginning of next month, right? Why was he having a tryst with Princess Xixia in a restaurant? Could it be that after His Highness Prince Li abandoned the Yi family's third miss, he was finally going to abandon the Yi family's fourth miss? He waved away the youth who was clamping down on him, and turned back to look at Mo Xiuyao. You want to stand up for her? Mo Xiuyao, you can't have really taken a fancy to this woman, right? You know, since we were young, our tastes have been as different as heaven and earth. Mo Xiuyao didn't get angry, and there was even a faint smile on his face. Also, to be disrespectful to the future mistress of the Ding royal household, Jingli, are you sure you want to do this? Mo Jingli's face darkened, and he fiercely glared at Yi Li. He disdainfully smiled at Mo Xiuyao and said, "Ha, the future mistress of the Ding royal household? Mo Xiuyao, are you sure you're talking about this woman?" Princess Ding and the mistress of the Ding royal household were two completely different concepts to the imperial family. If it was only Princess Ding, he could still ignore it, but if this woman really took control of the Ding royal household. Mo Jingli suddenly realized that it was a big mistake to encourage his emperor brother to marry this woman to Mo Xiuyao. Your Highness Prince Li, please watch your words. The brown-clothed youth who had retreated to the side stared at Mo Jingli with an unkind expression. Mo Jingli snorted, and without saying goodbye, he turned around and went downstairs. Princess Xixia, who was following beside him, looked at the situation in front of her with some confusion. She frowned and quickly chased after him. The good show was over, and many people who had been stimulated by the news they received today also left in twos and threes, pretending that nothing had happened. After a while, the only people left on the second floor were Yi Li's table and Mo Xiuyao's table. Yi Li helplessly smiled bitterly in her heart. After today, the capital would definitely be very lively. Cough cough, greetings to Prince. I suddenly remembered that I still have some things to buy. Zheng, Murongting, come with me. Hua Tianxiang lightly coughed and prepared to run away without any sense of loyalty. Qin Zheng and Mu Rongting also quickly nodded. After seeing Mo Xiuyao nod in agreement, they quickly went downstairs. Before Qin Zheng left, she didn't forget to give Yi Li a worried and encouraging look. Seeing the figures of her good friends disappear at the top of the stairs, Yi Li sighed in amusement. They wouldn't think that she was embarrassed like other little girls, right? Alright, seeing a fiancé that she had never met in this kind of situation, it seemed that she should express a certain degree of shyness. Thinking about it, Yi Li decided to give up on such a difficult performance. She raised her head and looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was also sizing her up. Prince, why don't we change places to talk? After all, people still have to do business here. She thought of the servant's report that Prince Ding's carriage had personally sent her granddaughter to the gate. Although no one saw Prince Ding himself, they could basically confirm that it was Prince Ding who had personally sent Yi Li back. Looking at Yi Ying's bitter face, old Madame Yi was even more disappointed in this pampered granddaughter. Since Li and Prince Ding's marriage was arranged, Prince Li's behavior towards Ying became less and less caring. Of course, this could be due to Yi Ying's reputation during this period. But such an obvious change, even an old woman like her who rarely went out could detect it. Could it be that her smart and clever granddaughter didn't notice it at all? She didn't think about how to hold on to Prince Li, but still found trouble for her sisters. Could it be that she didn't understand that even if Li was not favored, she was still a daughter of the Yi family? In the future, she would also be of help to the Yi family. For the first time, old Madame Yi doubted whether it was a mistake to exchange Yi Ying for Yi Li and Prince Li's marriage. Enough. Ying, Li is your elder sister. Pay attention to your propriety as a younger sister. Old Madame Yi said. Yi Ying was stunned. She couldn't believe that old Madame Yi would actually speak up for Yi Li. Her eyes reddened as she felt wronged. She bit her red lips and said, but grandmother, how could she embarrass Prince Li in public? This makes Ying, Pa. Old Madam Yi slammed the table heavily and said coldly, "Embarrass Prince Li." Prince Li made things difficult for Li, in front of so many people. Why didn't he think of embarrassing the Yi family? Or does he think that the Yi family can only have Prince Li? Old Madam Yi looked with some disappointment at Yi Ying, who still wanted to say something. For a man, she completely disregarded the family's reputation and interests. Could such a granddaughter really be expected to bring any benefits to the Yi family in the future? She was afraid that one day, she would sell the Yi family for Prince Li. Or did she think that it would be better if Li's reputation was ruined? One's glory, one's loss, all's loss. She didn't even understand what Wang Shi had taught her all these years. Her cold gaze swept across Wang Shi. Wang Shi couldn't help but shrink back, not daring to meet old Madame Ye's gaze directly. "Father," Minister Yi frowned with some headache. He was also somewhat dissatisfied with Mo Jingli. He could pretend that he didn't know that Prince Li wanted to make things difficult for Li, but that had to be done in private. By making things difficult and ridiculing openly, he wasn't slapping Yi Li's face. He was trampling on the Yi family's face. If it wasn't for the second daughter in the palace and the little grandson that was about to be born, so what if he was the emperor's younger brother? How could he tolerate it like this? Chapter 37. Li understands. "Please don't worry, grandmother." Yi Li stood up and responded. Wang Shi's face was a little pale. It was the responsibility of the mistress of the house to maintain relationships. If it was in Yi Li's personal name, it would be fine. But in the name of the Yi family, she asked Yi Li to do it. It was clearly embarrassing her as the mistress of the house. Old Madam Yi did not give her a chance to speak. She frowned and said, "If you have time, you might as well take care of Ing's dowry. Don't forget that there are not many days left before the wedding." "Yes." Wang Shi responded timidly. "Master, Old Madam Ye's nanny hurried in. She deliberately looked at Yi Li before walking to Old Madam Yi and said, 'Old Madam, young Master Su and the second, third, fourth, and fifth young masters of the Su family are here to visit.'" "What?" Minister Yi was so shocked that he jumped out of his chair. The young masters of the Su family came to visit at the same time. Didn't that mean that his troublesome brother-in-law had also arrived in the capital? Of course, with Master Su's pride, he would never personally visit the Yi family who killed his only baby sister. Old Madam Yi reacted quickly and said, "Quick, invite the young Masters Su in." Yi Li was also a little surprised. She did not know that her uncle and cousin had arrived in the capital and did not go to greet them. This made Yi Li feel a little guilty. When her uncle was still in the capital, he doted on her the most. After not seeing him for so many years, even Yi Li did not know what to do. "Grandmother, Li will go and greet them personally." Old Madam Yi nodded and said, "Go." Shan, Lin, go too. She ignored Yi Lin and Yi Shan's surprise and Yi Ying's dissatisfaction. She also did not care what old Madam Yi was thinking. Yi Li got up and walked out quickly. Yi Lin and Yi Shan behind her also quickly followed. Only Yi Ying was left looking at Minister Yi unwillingly. She was the future Princess Li. Why should she go and greet Yi Li's cousin? Minister Yi had a headache. This daughter of his was really spoiled too much. Seeing Minister Ye's expression, Yi Ying knew that her father was really angry. She had to bite her lips and turn around to follow Yi Li and others. Before Ing's wedding, let her come to Rongla Hall every day to serve me, her grandmother. Old Madam Yi looked at Wang Shi and said coldly. This daughter-in-law still has many things to tell her, I'm afraid. Wang Shi said uneasily. You teach. Look at what you've taught them all these years. Old Madam Yi said coldly. They don't know when to advance or retreat. Just because she had some talent and looks, she didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. These are nothing in the boudoir, but once you get married, you will have to take charge of a manor. Chapter 38. Yi Ying's expression changed slightly and she forced a smile. Yi Li quickly calmed down and smiled at Su Qingchen. Li has been rude. Eldest brother, let's go in. Father and grandmother are waiting for cousins and fifth brother. Su Qingchen nodded. Beside him, Su Qingze waved his hand. The servants of the Su family waiting at the side took out the gifts they had brought from the carriage behind them and respectfully followed behind their master to the gate of the Yi residence. Yi Li followed beside Su Qingchen and Su Qingze and asked softly, Eldest brother, how are eldest uncle and aunt? Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. Mother stayed in Yunzhou. Father is fine, he's just a little tired from the journey. He'll be fine after some rest. Eldest uncle and cousins came. Why didn't they tell Li so that Li could welcome them? Yi Li complained softly. Su Qingfeng, who was walking behind them, laughed and said, You can't blame me. It was eldest uncle who sent a letter in advance and forbade anyone from receiving them. My father only found out when eldest uncle and eldest brother moved to another residence in the capital. He even threw a huge tantrum. Yi Li also knew that eldest uncle didn't like formalities and didn't mind. She smiled and said, Then I'll go visit eldest uncle tomorrow. How are Mother Lin and Mother Wei? They're fine. Mother Lin and Mother Wei are the most loyal to aunt. Their families are also willing to follow you to the Ding residence. That's why grandfather let their families follow you. Su Qingze said. Yi Li nodded and didn't say anything polite. She felt even more guilty towards her grandfather. She had never been able to make him happy, yet she still had to make her grandfather worry about her at his age. Su Qingchen looked down at her and patted her shoulder lightly. Don't think too much. As long as you're well, grandfather will be happy. I know. Yi Li said. Yi Lin and Yi Shan watched as a few handsome men escorted Yi Li away. They then looked at Yi Ying, who had a gloomy expression on her face. After exchanging glances with each other, Yi Lin looked at Yi Ying and asked carefully, Fourth elder sister, those people, are third elder sister's cousins? Yi Ying raised her head and glared at her fiercely. Yi Lin could not help but take a step back when she saw the ruthless expression that she had never seen before. She almost bumped into Yi Shan behind her. Yi Ying sneered and looked at her with disdain. You should give up now. What kind of family is the Su family? They won't take a fancy to you. After saying that, he didn't care about Yi Lin's expression and turned to follow her. Yi Lin was taken aback by Yi Ying's words. Her delicate face instantly turned red. Thinking of Yi Ying's meaning, he felt ashamed and embarrassed. Yi Shan looked at her and shook her head. She's in a bad mood. Who asked you to provoke her? Let's go. Grandmother won't be happy if we're late. Chapter 39. Seeing old Madame Yi shut her mouth with a look of bitterness that she couldn't say. Yi Li was once again sure that when dealing with an old woman like old Madame Yi, she absolutely couldn't shed all pretense of cordiality and confront her with force. Seeing her own cousin speak so elegantly and courteously, who wouldn't believe that this was definitely a gentle and courteous junior respectfully listening to the elder's opinion? But looking at old Madame Ye's expression that definitely couldn't be called beautiful, could she really give any opinion? Even in the end, when old Madame Yi wanted Yi Shan and Yi Lin to accompany Yi Li to the Su family's side courtyard, her idea was rejected by Su Qingyan with a smile on his face, saying that men and women shouldn't be so close to each other. It would affect the reputation of the two young ladies. She could only helplessly watch as Yi Li was led out of the Yi family's main gate by the several young masters of the Su family. Once they left the Yi family, everyone was clearly much more relaxed and casual. Even Su Qingze, who always had a cold face, revealed a faint smile. The unfamiliarity between the siblings that had been separated for many years seemed to disappear in an instant. As for Su Qingyan, who was too young and didn't have an impression of Yi Li, he was very familiar with her. In a short while, they were intimate as if they had grown up together as siblings. Because the current head of the Su family, Su Qingchen, Su Qingbai, Su Qingyan's father, and Yi Li's uncle, Su Hongyu didn't want to be too conspicuous, so he didn't live in his younger brother's imperial censor manor. Instead, he directly lived in a small side courtyard of the Su family in the capital. Therefore, Yi Li and the others directly went to the Su family's side courtyard. Uncle, seeing the middle-aged man in front of her, who was still elegant and gentle, Yi Li called out hoarsely. Su Hongyu also looked at this little niece that he had doted on since childhood. Seeing that face that was 70% similar to his sister who had passed away early and was a bit stronger than her sister, he couldn't help but sigh softly. He waved his hand at Yi Li and said, Li, you've worked hard these years. Uncle knows about the matters in the capital. With Uncle around, let's see who still dares to make things difficult for you. Yi Li also felt that her eyes were somewhat sore. She forced a smile and said, with second uncle around, who dares to make things difficult for Li? Li, just Mrs. Uncle and Grandfather. Su Hongyu glanced at his brother with some dissatisfaction and said, if he was useful, would the mother and daughter of the Yi family be so smug? Su Hongyan also knew his brother's temper. He could only helplessly smile bitterly and said, Big brother is right. It's your younger brother who didn't take good care of Li, Uncle. Yi Li shook her uncle's arm unwillingly. She didn't feel any pressure to act coquettishly in front of her uncle. After all, she had been like this since she was young. Who asked her to be a real child at that time? Moreover, he was the only child in the entire Su family who was not afraid of first uncle. Su Hongyu lovingly rubbed the back of Yi Li's head and said with a smile, all right, uncle was just saying. I haven't seen you for so many years, but you only care about your second uncle. That's not true. Li has always missed uncle and grandfather. Then when your grandfather wants you to go to Yunzhou, you still dare to refuse? After chatting with her two uncles for a while, Su Hongyu had Su Qingyan bring her to the room that had already been prepared. At the same time, she could see the two mamas who had been waiting for a long time. Yi Li also knew that her uncle and cousin probably had something to talk about. She obediently followed Su Qingyan. Yi Li's room had already been prepared. It was in a quiet and secluded courtyard in the innermost part of the residence. The residence of the Su family, whether it was the imperial censor's residence or the former Su residence in the capital, was all simple and elegant. It also suited Yi Li's feelings very well. As soon as she stepped through the door, someone immediately came up to greet her, Miss. Two mamas dressed in plain clothes came up to greet her. When they saw Yi Li, they couldn't help but be stunned. Their eyes filled with hot tears. Mama Lin. Nanny. Yi Li called out. Mama Lin was a personal maid who had followed her mother since childhood. She was almost 50 years old this year. Yi Li's nanny was also a child of the Su family. She was also 40 years old this year. Yi Li still remembered that when she forcibly sent Mama Lin and Mama Wei back to the Su family, the two of them knelt in front of her and begged her. They would rather die than leave. Since then, until she met Qing Shuang, there had been no one she could trust around her. However, Yi Li didn't regret it. Because she was very clear that at that time, she had just recovered her memory and her mind was still in a mess. Moreover, her body was also very weak. It was impossible for her to protect these two people who were sincerely good to her. Miss. The two mamas quickly walked to Yi Li. Mama Lin said with tears in her eyes, Miss has finally grown up. You look so much like Miss. Wei Mama's feelings for Yi Li were even deeper. After all, she was the one who personally took care of Yi Li since she was young. Sob. I'm sorry, eldest Mississippi. I've left eldest Miss alone in the Yi residence for so many years. Fortunately, Miss is fine. Yi Li sighed in her heart. She was still a little clumsy to deal with such a situation. She could only persuade the two mamas clumsily. Su Qingyan looked at Yi Li's somewhat stiff appearance and secretly laughed. At the same time, he was sure that the Yi family had mistreated his cousin. Ahem. Mama Lin, Mama Wei, you will be with Sister Li in the future. It's not very soon. Why don't we go inside and talk slowly? After being reminded by Su Qingyan, the two mamas quickly wiped their faces and nodded repeatedly. Fifth young master is right. We were careless. Quick, miss, see if you like your room. If you don't like it, we can change it. Watching Yi Li being pulled away by the two mamas, Su Qingyan, who had been forgotten, was stunned for a moment. He rolled his eyes at the sky and turned to walk out. Yi Li was pulled into her room and received the enthusiasm of the two mamas. On the other side of the courtyard, the atmosphere in the study was somewhat cold. Su Hongyu sat behind the desk and looked at his younger brother. The smile on his lips made Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai, who were hiding behind him, couldn't help but shiver. So, His Highness Prince Li thinks that Li is not worthy of him and turned to seduce the Yi family's fourth young Mississippi. And the Emperor thinks that Li Er's reputation of 3,000 to 5,000 gold and the shame of being abandoned by Prince Li can be used to humiliate Prince Ding? Everyone's lips couldn't help but twitch. Seduce. Eldest uncle, you are a great scholar. Can't you speak more elegantly? Su Hongyan nodded and said, it is indeed so. As if he still felt that the atmosphere in the study was not low enough, Su Qingchen, who was sitting at the lower end, had a smile that was even more graceful than his father's as he took out a letter from his sleeve and said, just earlier today, Li Wang publicly stated at Chu Xiang Pavilion that no matter how much Li Er tries to please the crowd, he will definitely not marry her. Shiver. Su Qingyan, who had just slipped in, inconspicuously moved behind his fourth brother. Su Hongyu took the letter and looked at it for a while. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just as Su Hongyan was about to speak with some worry, he heard Su Hongyu laugh and say, not bad. You are truly worthy of being my Su family's daughter. As he said this, he directly handed the letter to Su Hongyan. Su Hongyan's lips twitched as he tried not to laugh. He had always stayed in the capital. How could he not know that this niece of his was definitely not as elegant as she appeared to be on the surface? But to be this fierce was rare. She was probably really provoked by Prince Li. Chapter 40. Prince Ding was there. Su Hongyan folded the letter and put it in his sleeve, ignoring Su Qingyan, who was still waiting for him. He had to go back and study how to add more information to Prince Li. Sure enough, he was too idle to find trouble with Li Er. Li Er seemed to have talked with Prince Ding. They seemed to have reached some kind of agreement. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Su Hongyu thought for a moment and waved his hand. Your grandfather thinks highly of Prince Ding. Li Er doesn't seem to be dissatisfied with the marriage. Qingchen, I'll leave the rest to you. Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. I understand. I've been away from the capital for many years and haven't seen Prince Ding for a long time. When Yi Li arrived at the Su family, she found out that Su Qingchen didn't just say that to brush off Madame Yi when he said that she needed to learn a lot of things. In fact, on the second day Yi Li stayed at the Su family's residence, second aunt personally asked Duchess Hua to teach her how to manage the household and how to interact with the nobles. In addition, an old maid from the palace taught Yi Li the etiquette and rules of the palace. Every afternoon, Su Hongyu would personally explain some strategies to Yi Li, and then Su Qingchen would teach her how to appreciate antiques and treasures. He would also give her a detailed breakdown of the various powers in the capital. Yi Li had always thought that she had lived longer than others, so she should have learned a lot. Now she knew that in the eyes of her uncles and cousins in the Su family, she was still far from being an excellent lady. Thus, Yi Li began to take all sorts of exams, just like how she did in her previous life. She strived to memorize as much knowledge as possible from her uncle's teachings within a short span of a month. Miss Qin is here. Yi Li was sitting in the pavilion playing chess with Su Qingbai. Su Qingyan was watching from the side. Qing Shuang came in to report. These days, not only was Yi Li forced to learn, but Qing Shuang and Qing Xia who came with her were also taught by Mother Lin. Although it had only been a short time, Qing Shuang had become much more mature than before. Su Qingyan's eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, my future second sister-in-law. Su Qingbai put down the chess piece and smiled at Yi Li. Since there are guests here, let's continue tomorrow. Yi Li was more than happy to oblige. Compared to Go, she actually preferred Chinese chess. From Yi Li's point of view, Go was a game that placed a lot of emphasis on feelings. It required a macro strategy, a silent strategy, and mutual infiltration. Chess, on the other hand, was much faster. Horses and spears could be swung, and weapons could be exchanged. In Yi Li's heart, it was still the same as it was in her previous life. She liked the feeling of pleasure even more. As Su Qingbai put down his pieces, Yi Li raised her head and smiled. I'm not good at playing Go. I'm afraid that fourth brother has already lost his patience, right? Su Qingbai stood up and shook his head with a smile. Compared to Xiao Wu, I'd rather play with you. Su Xiao Wu was the Su family's #1 Go addict, Go idiot. He was terrible at playing Go, but he was still obsessed with it. It was a pity that even the servants in the Su family disdained to play Go with him. Hearing Su Qingbai's words, Su Qingyan looked at Yi Li with a mournful expression. Yi Li couldn't help but twitch her mouth. She really didn't know if fourth brother was praising her or insulting her. Qin Zheng was quickly invited in, and Su Qingbai also took Su Qingyan out. Li, it seems like you're doing well in the Su family. Qin Zheng stood outside the pavilion and smiled at Yi Li. Yi Li's face was ashen as she pulled Qin Zheng in. I never knew that I still had so many things to learn. Qin Zheng covered her mouth and snickered. Aunt Yi passed away early, so you naturally have more to learn. Which one of us didn't grow up from elementary school? Moreover, you're not marrying into an ordinary family, but into the Ding royal estate. You can't blame Uncle Su and the rest for being so meticulous. Yi Li thought of the 2 military strategy books that she still had in her study and couldn't help but frown. Those who didn't know would think that she wasn't getting married but going to war. However, compared to the books that Mother Lin and the wet nurse brought, Yi Li wisely chose the more practical and interesting military strategy books. Let's not talk about this. Has my biological sister seen my second brother? Yi Li asked Qin Zheng with a smile. Qin Zheng was slightly surprised and glared at Yi Li before saying in a low voice, eldest young master and second young master have both gone out. Yi Li sighed regretfully. That meant that she hadn't seen them. After thinking about it, she leaned over to Qin Zheng's side and laughed softly. It's okay, they will come back. Looking at her meaningful smile, Qin Zheng's face turned even redder. She was so angry that she reached out to pinch her. Yi Li hurriedly begged for mercy while dodging. Sister Qin, I was wrong. I know I was wrong, have mercy. Qin Zheng glared at her fiercely again before saying, you girl. Why didn't you feel anything when you saw Prince Ding that day? Yi Li's calm performance that day had left a deep impression on Qin Zheng. Qin Zheng compared her unsettled mood and couldn't help but feel depressed and uneasy. Yi Li touched her nose in embarrassment. How could she have the nerve to tell the young girl in front of her that she was already past the age of blushing when facing a handsome guy? Cough, about this, just be normal. It's nothing. It's everyone's first time meeting each other and no one is worse than the other. Yi Li persuaded. Qin Zheng angrily rolled her eyes at Yi Li. Chapter 41. Imperial Mother. The consort dowager sneered and looked at Mo Jingli helplessly. Li, you really made a mistake this time. Although Imperial Mother couldn't see through third young Miss Ye's depth, how could that girl really be a barren daughter like others say? Besides, even if she really is a barren daughter, as long as she isn't a fool, she is still more valuable than Yi Ying. I heard that the head of the Su family, Su Hongyu, and several other young masters have arrived in the capital. Now you should know how important Yi Li is to the Su family. Mo Jingli coldly snorted. No matter how old the Su family is, they have already withdrawn from the imperial court. Besides, that Yi Li has no virtue to speak of. She is unfit to be the princess consort of the Li Palace. The consort dowager sighed and nodded. Forget it, as long as you know what you are doing. Mo Jingli didn't know that the recent days were just the beginning of his bad luck. Even if they had already withdrawn from the imperial court, the power of the aristocratic families that had spanned across 2 dynasties for hundreds of years was not something a mere prince could resist. Ding Kingdom Residence, Prince, third young Master Feng is here. Hearing the guard's report, Mo Xiaoyao put down the brush he was painting and frowned. Let him in. After a while, Feng Zhiyao appeared at the door of the study, looking like a hedonistic son of rich parents. He said with a grin, the wedding is near and you can still sit still. Mo Xiaoyao didn't look at him and said indifferently, what are you doing here? It won't be good to let people know that you are in contact with me. Feng Zhiyao helplessly shrugged. I didn't want to come. Someone wants to see you. The threshold of your Ding Kingdom residence is too high, so they came to find me. Mo Xiaoyao stopped painting and pondered for a moment before raising his head. Su Qingchen. Prince Ding is well informed. You really live up to your reputation. Someone outside the door laughed. Su Qingchen, dressed in white, gracefully walked in. The study suddenly accommodated 3 outstanding men with their own characteristics, making it seem a little crowded in an instant. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Su Qingchen in silence for a moment, then sighed and said, Thank you for your hard work, great Mr. Su. Su Qingchen nodded in satisfaction and said, There's no need for that. Even if it wasn't you, if it was someone else, father would still personally come to the capital. You should know that Li, is the only daughter of our Su family. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and found a place to sit as he looked at Mo Xiaoyao mockingly. Like he said, the future Ding Wang Fei's backing was very big. Su Qingchen clearly had no intention of being courteous. He walked over to an empty chair and sat down. Sizing up Mo Xiaoyao, he said, who would have thought that the #1 young general in the capital would become so? I hope that big sister will be magnanimous and not blaming, Hearing this, Yizhen looked at Yi Li doubtfully. She smiled and said, Fourth sister, you must be joking. We are sisters, so what's there to blame? Big sister still needs to rely on you in the future. Yi Ying smiled and said, Grandmother is right. We are sisters, so naturally, we need to help each other. Big sister, don't say that you need to rely on us. Yi Li sat at the side and listened to the 2 chatting. She had a rough idea of what old Madam Yi and Yi Ying were talking about. But she was still surprised that Yi Ying would listen to old Madam Ye's teachings. Of course, she believed in another saying, a leopard cannot change its spots. Even if Yi Ying really listened to old Madam Ye's teachings, it was impossible for her personality to change in such a short time. It seemed that something had happened these days that she was not aware of. Late at night, the minister's manor, which should have been quiet, was still brightly lit for tomorrow's wedding. Even the maidservants in Yi Li's Qingyi pavilion were excited. After all, the marriage of the 4th miss of the Qingyi pavilion to the Li Palace was a joyous occasion. Everyone in the Qingyi pavilion would be rewarded handsomely. Yi Li dismissed the servants beside her. As usual, she picked up the book that she had not finished reading and sat under the lamp to read. From time to time, she would pick up the pen and write. After an unknown amount of time, the noise that came from afar seemed to gradually fade away. Yili raised her hand and rubbed her eyebrows tiredly. Her body, which was leaning against the chair, slowly leaned to one side. Her calm eyes were tinged with sleepiness. Yili blinked her eyes. Finally, she could not resist the sleepiness and slowly closed her eyes. The cold room was silent. Only the occasional crackling of the lamp could be heard. After a long time, a black shadow flashed out of Qingyi Pavilion. It seemed that the person was very familiar with the layout of the manor. He easily avoided the guards in the manor, jumped over the wall of the backyard and disappeared into the dark night. In Qingyi Pavilion, there was no trace of the owner in the cold and elegant boudoir. Only an open book was left on the ground beside the desk. Chapter 45. What about the guy who kidnapped third Miss Yi? Catch him and give him an arm and a leg as a wedding gift to Mo Jingli. Although the city gate had long been closed, Yili still returned to the minister's mansion before dawn with some effort. As soon as she entered her room, Qing Shuang and Qing Yu greeted her. The unconcealable anxiety on their faces also turned into relief. Qing Yu calmly served Yili a cup of tea. It was as if the usually elegant and dignified Yili was not bothered by the fact that she was able to jump in through the window in front of her. Qing Shuang patted her chest and exhaled, "Miss, you're finally back." Qing Shuang was worried to death. Yili smiled and said, "What's there to worry about when someone is following me?" "Right, Qing Wan." A figure fell lightly outside the window. It was Qing Wan who came from the Su family with Qing Yu. Qing Wan pursed her lips and smiled, "Miss, you're so powerful." Qing Wan followed you all the way and no one noticed. Who knew that I couldn't hide from you? Yili smiled and said, "In fact, I didn't notice you, but I seemed to smell a faint, special and familiar fragrance along the way. The person who caught me, the fragrance on his body was not light, so he didn't smell it." Qing Wan lowered her head in frustration and secretly decided that she would never use any incense in the future. In fact, the incense she used was very light. Ordinary people would not notice it at all. But Yi Li's senses were indeed much more sensitive than ordinary people. "Did anything interesting happen in the woods after I left?" Yi Li sat down and asked while drinking the freshly brewed tea. Qing Wan also learned from Yi Li's action and came in through the window. She smiled and said, "That person was thrown into a pool in the depths of the woods." Prince Ding. Miss is wise. Qing Wan smiled in a good mood. Thinking of the embarrassing appearance of someone who was tied to a tree and thrown into the pool, Qing Wan felt that tonight's worry was not in vain. She believed that eldest young master would also like this news very much. This servant also saw someone beside Prince Ding. They seemed to have a very good relationship. Yili raised her eyebrows and looked at Qing Wan. Qing Wan did not keep her in suspense and said, "It's the famous young master Feng San in the capital." Yili hadn't thought about the relationship between Feng Zhiyao and Mo Xiuyao. This also explained why Feng Zhiyao had been so curious about her during the 100-Flower Festival. So His Highness Prince Ding also went to save Miss? Young Miss didn't see Prince Ding. Qing Shuang blinked her eyes and asked curiously. Yili shook her head. She knew that there were other people in the forest at that time. She could vaguely guess who it was, but she had no intention of meeting them, so she ignored them. Since Mo Xiuyao did not order anyone to stop Qing Wan, he must have understood her intentions. When it was close to noon, old Madame Ye's white eyebrows gradually frowned. She ordered the people around her, "Go out and see if the wedding party has arrived." After a while, the people who were sent out hurriedly came back. They wiped their sweat and reported, "Old Madam. The wedding party has not arrived yet." Old Madam Ye's smiling face suddenly darkened. It was almost noon. It was inauspicious to come in the afternoon to escort the bride. Is Prince Li really going to abandon fourth sister again? The youngest, Yi Shan, suddenly asked. Shan, Yi Shan's birth mother was so scared that her face turned pale. How dare you? Today is fourth sister's big day. What nonsense are you talking about? Go out. Yi Li said sternly. She glanced at Yi Shan before old Madam Yi got angry. Yi Shan moved her lips and wanted to say something. Yi Lin quickly pulled her and her birth mother and dragged Yi Shan out. Shan, is young and speaks without thinking. It's Li's fault for not teaching her properly. Grandmother, please don't be angry. Yi Li looked at old Madam Yi and said softly. Third miss is right. Sixth miss is a little girl. It's inevitable that she has some thoughts. Fortunately, everyone here is our family. Old Madam, please don't be angry because today is fourth Miss's big day. Because Yi Shan was pregnant, concubine Zhao was given a seat as an exception. At this time, she quickly stood up and pleaded with old Madam Yi. Old Madam Yi was not in the mood to argue with Yi Shan. She waved her hand and said, Go and ask Master to come here. Also, send someone to check. Knowing that old Madam Yi was not in a good mood, the servant did not dare to say anything and hurriedly left. Chapter 46. The atmosphere in Rong Hall was a bit heavy. Yi Li was still sitting quietly and drinking tea. Concubine Zhao was sitting sideways and peeking at Yi Li from time to time. But she found that there was no emotion on this young lady's face. It was as if nothing had happened. For a moment, concubine Zhao was not sure if today's matter had anything to do with the third young lady. Seemingly aware of concubine Zhao's gaze, Yi Li raised her head and glanced at her. The completely unreadable gaze made concubine Zhao's heart go cold. She nodded slightly to Yi Li, then leaned her head against the back of the chair and closed her eyes to rest. Seeing that noon had passed, the messenger who had been waiting outside the gate had not returned. It seemed that Prince Li's wedding was destined to be late. Minister Yi came in with Wang Shi in a hurry. Old Madam Yi stared at her son and daughter-in-law and said sternly, What happened? Did you find out? Minister Ye's face was also clouded. He said in a deep voice, Mother, calm down. The people who were sent to find out have returned. Prince Li's mansion has already set off. Already set off. Old Madam Yi was so angry that she laughed. She said a few good words and pointed at Minister Yi, which family's daughter is getting married and the husband's family can forget the auspicious time of the wedding. After a few days, our Yi family will be the joke of the whole capital. What does Prince Li's mansion mean? The daughter-in-law has not married into the family and they are already slapping our Yi family's face. Minister Yi frowned and said, Perhaps there really is something that delayed them. Old Madam Yi snorted and said, What is more important than the wedding? Minister Yi was suddenly speechless. Old Madam Yi could only sigh. Today, it was already a joke that Prince Li's mansion was late. But no matter how angry they were, they still had to send Yi Ying out. Otherwise, Yi Ying's reputation would really be ruined. She glared at Wang Shi angrily and said, What are you waiting for? See if Ying is ready. When the wedding's people come, send Ying out immediately. Wang Shi did not care about her grievances and anger at this time. She quickly said, It has already been ready. We are just waiting to say goodbye. Old Madam can go out. Old Madam Yi snorted and did not speak. When the servants finally came to report that the wedding's procession was about to arrive, it was already the end of the night. Yi Ying was supported by her maidservants and nannies to Rongla Hall to bid farewell to old Madam Yi. Although her face was painted with exquisite makeup, Yi Li, who was sitting close to her, could see that her face was a little pale and her eyes were a little red and swollen. It was obvious that Yi Ying had cried before, too. Yi Mo Jingli was wearing a red four-clawed golden dragon wedding robe. His already handsome face was even more majestic and dignified. However, Yi Li could clearly see the stiffness in his indifferent expression that was different from usual. Then she looked at the unnatural pale face and the shadows in his eyes. Yi Li was forced to sit in silence for the whole morning. Her mood miraculously improved a lot. She dared to bet with her cousin's title of Zhuang Yuan that Mo Jingli's face was definitely made up. Mo Jingli almost saw Yi Li, who was wearing a lavender dress beside Minister Yi at first sight. A fire flashed in his eyes. His eyes were so enthusiastic that he even ignored his bride. Minister Yi coughed a little unhappily. Mo Jingli reluctantly moved his eyes and saluted Minister Yi. I came late. Please forgive me, father-in-law. If he didn't mention it, it would be fine. But when he mentioned it, Minister Yi was full of anger. His tone was a little light. I don't dare. I only hope that Prince will treat Ying well in the future. Mo Jingli knew that he was in the wrong. He hurriedly said yes and promised to treat Yi Ying well. When he looked up, he happened to see Yi Li's face with a faint smile. Thinking of his experience last night, Mo Jingli couldn't wait to rush over and tear Yi Li apart. From childhood to adulthood, he was the one who tortured others. Except for the former Mo Xiuyao, this was the first time he was tortured so badly. Before dawn, he woke up from his sleep and found that he was tied up and left in the pool. But no matter how he screamed, the guards he brought to the forest came to find him after dawn. Although it was close to May, the pool was cold all year round. When he was pulled out, he was frozen and couldn't move. It was not easy to get to the courtyard outside the city. He drank ginger soup and medicine to drive the cold. After he recovered, he hurried back to the city. He endured the discomfort all over his body to pick up the bride, but he still missed the auspicious hour. Compared with himself, Yi Li, who was looking at him with a calm smile at this time, was so good that it made him gnash his teeth. I will never let you go. Mo Jingli's eyes were gloomy and cruel. Yi Li faintly curled her lips. She had no hope for Mo Jingli's IQ. She simply gave him a look back. I'll be waiting for you. Yi Li didn't know that the brief exchange of glances between her and Mo Jingli at this time became completely different in the eyes of people with ulterior motives. Wang Shi, who was standing beside Yi Ying, saw the interaction between the two in her eyes. A trace of ruthlessness flashed through her half-closed eyes. After sending Yi Ying out, what should be done on the surface had been done. Yi Li ignored the complicated and unpredictable eyes of the people and went back to Qing Yi Xian in a good mood. As soon as she stepped into the study, Yi Li paused for a moment. Chapter 47. Yi Li shook her head, and a rare bright smile appeared on her beautiful face. But the man on the ground couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. Killing people to silence them is not something a lady of a noble family should do. So, I plan to give you away. I heard that many people are looking for you. Tell me, should I give you to Prince Ding or to Prince Li? The man looked at Yi Li with a bitter face and begged for mercy. If he fell into Prince Ding's hands, he would definitely lose an arm or a leg. If he fell into Prince Li's hands, Prince Li would definitely want his life just because a certain someone was standing here and threatening him. Third miss, I'm only doing this because I'm paid. Moreover, I've helped you before. Can't you be magnanimous and spare my life? Yi Li turned around and found a comfortable chair to sit in. She smiled and asked, Are you helping me? Isn't it because Mo Jingli offended you and you want to teach him a lesson? Unable to beg for mercy, the man could only put away the smile on his face and said seriously, How about I owe third miss a favor? Yi Li supported her chin and smiled lazily. This. Even if you dare to owe young Master Feng Yu a favor from the Wind and Moon brothel, I dare not ask you to return it. The Wind and Moon brothel was the world's #1 brothel. Young Master Feng Yu, Han Mingyue, was the world's famous flower thief. Being associated with him was equivalent to having one's reputation destroyed. This time, the man's expression changed completely. He stared at Yi Li and said, "My jade pendant is in your hands." In this world, only a handful of people knew that young Master Feng Yu and the owner of the Wind and Moon brothel were the same person. "I didn't know that third Miss Yi of the minister's estate, the future princess consort of Ding, had such tricks up her sleeves." To be able to secretly take the jade pendant from him was not an easy thing to do. Han Mingyue even suspected that he didn't have a good time coming to the capital this time. Originally, he had only caught a little girl for Prince Li to play with on a whim. He didn't expect that this seemingly harmless lady was a poisonous flower. He had originally wanted to toy with the arrogant Prince Li, but in the end, he had gotten himself involved as well. Less than an hour after leaving the forest that day, he discovered that he was being followed. 2 hours later, the original group of people had split into 2 groups. By daybreak, even Mo Jingli's men had joined in. Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. She patiently looked at the handsome man in front of her. Finally, Han Mingyue raised her hand helplessly and admitted defeat. She said, "Third young Mistress Yi, what do I have to do for you to let me go? If necessary, lend me the intelligence network of the Wind and Moon Pavilion." Yi Li proposed her condition. Han Mingyue's eyes flashed. This one does not understand what Miss Yi means.